My name is Barry Palmer, Barrypalmer.
And today's date is August 27th, 2011. We're at Ken de Russy's Hang Gliding Museum, and we're honored to have Barry with us today and John Dickinson as well. My name is Paul Dees, and I hope to be hearing more, Barry, about your story of your early gliding adventures. So to start us off, maybe tell us how you came to be interested in...
Actually, can you just ask him if we have his permission to use his
likeness?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so Barry, do we have your permission to use your likeness in film or any of the information we gather today in future publications, as long as, of course, we are faithful to the account that you're giving us today?
Yes.
Launch flight.
Well, I happened to go through the usual crystal set and model airplane childhood, so I had some mechanical skills. Boy, where'd that come from? And I just worked my way up through college and was working at an aerospace plant. And for some unknown reason, hang gliding really hadn't entered my mind because nobody was hang gliding when I was looking at this. But I was known for developing screwball projects in my cubicle area at the aerospace plant. Since I was a staff engineer, nothing I ever worked on got built. I had the sideline of wanting to build something, but the first thing I had to do at the aerospace plant is get along with the other engineers as we overcame the tendency of engineers and programmers of computers being separate. We had this huge room filled with a computer, and it cost $428 a minute. That was in 1960 to run the thing. And you had to flowchart your computer program, hand it to a programmer. The programmer programmed it and brought it back to you, and then you repaired it. And engineers did not like this, and we started fiddling with our own programs. So I decided I was going to write a program since I'd never done it. And at the same time, one of my office mates came up to me with a picture of the Ryan Fleep, which is what's called now. It's a Regalo wing with an aircraft engine on it. And I don't think it was called a Fleep at that time, but I think that's the name it's known as. And at the time, I was working on a very high aspect ratio man-powered airplane, and I thought, nuts to this, I'm going to play with this wing. And so I wrote the computer program, not to develop the wing, but to learn how to program a computer. So the reason for flight was not there. I was fascinated by bird flight, however. So I decided that maybe I ought to build one of these and just sort of put it off in the wings. And I mentioned it to my brother, and I have yet to this date know whether he was trying to help me or get rid of me. But he said, I know where there's some tubing you can use. So we went back to the University of California, the physics department, and I had previous attempts at hang gliding with normal type Chinook styled wings with no success. And I had a rack, and we piled all this tubing on the rack and started to drive off, and then a campus cop caught us. So we took the rack and tubing and all, set it down on the weeds, and my brother went to the physics department where he was getting his PhD, and he bought the whole mess. So that was the start of my hang gliding career. I had the calculations, and I had an area of lawn available and a drill, so it was literally look at the calculations, calculate the stresses that I would expect, since the material was horribly rusted aluminum. Then I'd just place a couple of sawhorses on the ground at the calculated space and put my knee into it and make sure it would handle the bending loads. And that was the maximum sophistication. Then I would just put the tubing out on the lawn, start drilling holes, and get a painter's drop cloth which is 4 mil polyethylene, and put the whole mess together within probably 3 or 4 days. And I had a hang glider that cost me $10.89, I think. It's probably the cheapest man-carrying airplane you can find. So we took it out. I had a buddy, John Spielman, that I met in school, and so we took it out and we tried to fly it, and we had limited success because I had placed a bar across the 2 hang elements that I was going to hang from to prevent anybody from going further forward on the glider than the calculations indicated was practical. And when we couldn't get it to fly with that bar there, we just threw it to the winds and moved the bar forward, or moved it back in some cases. And we went out and we tried to fly it again. And I got up on the top of the hill, and John was walking away, and he said, "Barry, you're never going to get that thing to fly." And I had to yell at him, "Hey, John." There I was up there somewhere. And he went right back up on the hill after all the tries, and he flew it the first try. There's a lot to be said for knowing something can be done. So we eventually graduated to a bigger hill, and this glider would be modified and to keep the tubing supply up. And we continued to fly, but we had to be a little bit secretive of it because I had 2 air bases very near to me, and I was afraid of having somebody phone the police and get the sheriff out there. And so I
Like
did.
they might think you were a Russian airplane or something like that, or the Ruskies came or something.
This was an era of national paranoia. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So anyway, we graduated to a larger hill, and we had these problems with the possibility of somebody seeing us, and particularly the landowner, since we were in there uninvited. And I wanted to preserve this particular hill because it was an ideal slope.
And where was this hill?
This hill was in a place called Latrobe, California, and that's just a dot on a map. There used to be a city there in the heyday of the railroads, and I don't think there was much there, but it's near Sacramento, California.
And can you give us a time frame about maybe a month and year of when your experiments were taking
September 1961.
Okay.
Well, anyway, we flew numerous flights. I would say tens of flights down this hillside, and we had no problems. And I even went into a hang system where you just hung on a seat, sort of like a ski lift seat, and you had a single stick in front of you. And this is more toward what a modern hang glider configuration is. And I sort of stopped, and I decided I'd let NASA know what I was doing with their wings. And I got a response from Rogallo, and he said they were doing a similar thing at that time. He didn't tell me what it was. It was a Parasev, though, a vehicle of theirs that all the astronauts flew, and everybody glowed over, but apparently it didn't work out. But this gliding example, well, it's typical of political things. They had 9 people working on it, and I was alone, and I was the guy that was flying. But they had a tow plane operator, and it was primarily a towed vehicle, and a pilot and an engineer, and on and on and on. So they were impeding themselves, as any government agency can do. And that's all I heard about it, was that we were working on this. Then sometime later, a venture capitalist showed up and told me, I'm willing to sponsor building one of these things, only it had power. And this doesn't sound like hang gliding, but it turned out that way. Because the engine that I used happened to like to stop frequently, and not always when the wheels were planted on the ground. So I did a lot of glides from altitude. I had to be subtle when he was there, because I didn't want to reveal this fact. And I built the first trike. And it was basically modeled on that very first hang glider with the hanging seat. So I really sort of walked into it for no reason at all. And he paid me to build it. So talk about having fun and getting paid for it. That was a wonderful opportunity. But then I sort of left it. I built a third one after I left the venture capitalist. And that was really the only accident I ever had with a wing, and nobody was hurt. And my worry was that it was in the Phoenix Desert, and there was nowhere to land but the cholla cactus fields they had there. So I just barely made it back to some pavement. But after that, I dropped it, and for no particular reason. Yes, it was fun, but there was nothing spectacular about it. I never really went out and tried to seek publicity, and that's about it.
So, tell us again, when you were in school, what were you studying?
I was mechanical engineering,
Okay.
and with an aero minor, which is not much to add to a curriculum such as mechanical engineering.
And you were at UC Berkeley
Correct.
to do that? Okay. And then, when you first were building your glider, your very first one, did you have a name for it or a designation for it, or how?
Not really.
Yeah.
I just built the glider in the dorm room, and it was an 8th floor dorm room, no less. But I was a little bit curious about hang gliding. I took it out, and yes, I could have jumped up in the air and gotten a flight photo, but it really didn't fly. One of the problems was I failed to seal the fabric properly because I didn't want to anesthetize all the people in the dorm room. To assemble this glider, first assemblies were done in the dorm room with one wing sticking out of a 8th floor window, but this was sort of normal things going on at Berkeley.
Barry, which wing are you speaking of?
This is a monoplane with 2 rails set below the wing. So it was still a true hang glider where you're hanging on rather than tethered to it.
The 2 rails you're speaking of, we call parallel bars.
Correct.
That's what you're referring to.
And this is before your 1961 flights, right? This is
Yes.
a previous.
I built a glider in my senior year in a dorm room, and it had a span of about 22 feet and a chord or wing width of about 4 feet. And I was reluctant to seal the fabric well because I didn't want to anesthetize everybody in the dorm. So attempts to fly it just north of San Francisco were a fizzle. The thing just would not fly. Yes, I could have jumped into the air and you'd have a in-flight picture, and I did fly it enough to learn that once a wingtip went down, it stayed down. And the two parallel bars that I was hanging from could not provide enough leverage to get that wing back up. But it was followed by a friend of mine building more of what is called a Chinook hang glider, or a biplane hang glider, and that fabric on that was well sealed since he built it at home, I think. And that didn't fly any better either. And I realized the only way I would get these machines to fly would be to camp at the beach until the wind came up so I had something to fly on. But I sort of suspended that and went to the other type of wing by pure accident, quite frankly.
Did the monoplane? Did you have the monoplane in hand at more or less at the time that you started working on the Regalo?
I did not have the monoplane in hand
So
when
these
are separate events, but they're quite close together. The objective of building the glider, the Regalo glider, was to learn how to program a computer. It had nothing to do with flight, but it just, one thing led to another, and I decided to go ahead and build it, especially when my brother pointed this free tubing that I could use. And the fact that a painter's drop cloth only cost $5, that further stimulated me.
And once you actually had your tubing and drop cloth wing flying, what did that feel like the first time you flew it, or once you started getting some good flights in it? How did that make you feel?
Well, it felt like I should have done this to start with. I shouldn't have had all the trouble. But there was a learning phase in how to fly it. And since I wasn't a pilot, I really can't say how great it flew. But it seemed to fly very easily. And I was a little bit surprised at how easy it was to fly.
So Barry, once you were flying and you had started to come up on the learning curve a little bit, what was a flight like? How long was it in duration and distance, for instance?
Well, how long were the flights? Typically 100 yards is the outer limit, and lots of time it was just a skip and a hop. And if a headwind hit me, it would balloon into the air and then settle back. And this was caused by the fact that I was hanging from these parallel bars that were below the plane of the wing, and they'd cause the nose of the wing to pitch up just from my inertia. But I'd never found it scary, although one has to look at it from the glider to really see what the average person would see, because you might only be 8 feet off the ground, but you're looking at a piece of the ground that's about 30 feet down. But the flight height wasn't particularly scary to me, because I really knew what was going on. Things seemed to be working the way they should.
Such a steep angle that it seems to me that you could not effectively do anything except move your weight rearward. So you would have started maybe at one point, let yourself slip backwards slightly. Is that correct?
No, as far as handling the glider goes in the air, we clambered all over the bars. I think you'll find a movie in there where I'm actually wrapped around one of the bars trying to make it turn. It was extremely roll insensitive. The parallel bars just don't work out for roll. And I suspect that's for all the people you see flying with the parallel bars.
And how big was the wing that you were flying?
The size of the wing was 32-foot span, I believe, as I recall. But I flew various sizes down to, I don't know, I didn't use the wingspan as a dimension. I used the length of the spars, and the long spars were up to 27 feet long. The normal size was 22 feet, and the shortest 17 feet. And I really can't reference it. I have to look at the numbers to tell what the wingspan was.
Do you remember the wing area approximately?
The wing area, I remember, with the 22-foot spar was 283 square feet.
Okay. And describe to us this, you were still flying at Latrobe, I presume.
No, we had migrated out to north of San Francisco, and I think we held that contest at Latrobe. He always has a contest, so with anything he would do, so I knew it was a contest. And they flew about the same. He did a much better job than mine, though. But it didn't seem to affect the flight that much. He still used a painter's drop cloth, but he got to choose his tubing diameters, so he had a more rigid glider than I had.
A lot of folks, they've seen photos of a Chinook-style glider with two parallel bars where you're hanging by your armpit, and they're familiar with the control bar arrangement that is used in hang gliders today. So how was your arrangement similar to or different from any of those more commonly seen types of pilot arrangements?
Well, these gliders were a true hang glider. I thought I was emulating Lilienthal. It was the whole objective, but I didn't realize that at the time that Lilienthal was actually flying on his forearms. But the pictures of his flights are not that detailed, so I thought he was hanging by his underarms. And after flying hanging from my underarms, and I think anybody that has been on crutches for a while knows that your underarms are not built to spin your body weight. They just simply hurt. And that limited the length of your flight also.
Do you ever have any structural failures in flight?
I had, with structural failures, no. Never even had a hint of one, except perhaps some of the masking tape I held the painter's drop cloth on peeled loose, but that was an infield repair, easily.
Well, at some point in one of the movies, it's clear that you're no longer hanging from your armpits, you're holding on with your hands. I don't know if that was your way of preparing for landing, or if you just thought you'd try that to do something different. Why were you doing that?
Well, a lot of it was just playing around with hand grips, but the parallel bars were sloped because I tried a set of parallel bars that were level in flight, and they just hurt too much. So when I put the parallel bars the way I did it on the gliders, I was bearing a lot of my weight on my hands, and that was the main reason for sloping those parallel bars. But again, I said this seemed to, maybe I'm being a purist, but this was a true hang glider. And what they fly now is sort of a intermediate hang glider made easy, because there's a lot of advantages to having a hang point. The hang point is located as a reference for flight. And when you take off, you have that reference. You apply forces to change the center of gravity. But with a hang glider, you don't know where you're going to grab those bars, and you have to take off and hunt around a little bit until you get into a sweet spot, and then it takes off and glides. And I see a lot of these photographs of old parallel bar hang glider people, and I say, hey, have these people really got control of this thing? Because I went through the same things. I was scrambling around, getting the glider under control, and then settling down to a single point and able to continue my glide smoothly.
Your parallel tubes were angled, say roughly 45 degrees.
When in flight,
off
yes.
The vertical. And so if you wanted to move your weight forward, you had to kind of hand over hand pull yourself forward. That must have been quite a physical feat.
Not really.
No?
It was very simple. You just hand over handed forward, or you would stall out. But we made lots of flights where we changed our center of gravity location, and were able to land in zero wind standing up, which classic aerodynamics does not allow.
Now, tell us a little bit about, did you try any other means of trying to get better control on the glider, or did you experiment around, or what did you do to deal with the control issue that you found?
Well, the last of my hang gliders had a hanging seat, just as a modern hang glider. And I still had the parallel bars. And that solved the roll problem. However, since I was on the last of my supply of tubing, construction was getting a little rough, and I really couldn't lay it up on a 45-degree angle or anything, because my universal joint that held the seat, kept the seat from rotating relative to the glider, was not that sound, and also I didn't exactly size the stick large enough. But later on, when I built the powered hang glider, I had taken this into account, and that powered hang glider, I would lay up in a good 45-degree plus angle. I'd be swapping directions 180 degrees in 5 seconds. And actually, that's the first place where I got hang gliding experience similar to what's done today. And this was about, I don't know, 1968 or 67, I guess. It's in my logbook, but my memory is not there.
Say again what you said.
The number of flights we flew, I have no idea, because as I say, I did not know I was generating history at that time, so I was very careless on getting dates and times and such. But I did make performance calculations from the movies that I took, and that was the main reason for filming these flights. But I would say the order of maybe 10 flights a day and maybe 10 days out on the hill.
Now, since you said that you tried to do these secretively, were there other people that heard about this, or did anyone ever express to you a desire of, gee, that looks like fun, I'd like to do that too?
Well, I was in a very private place. There were a few livestock around, and that was about it. In fact, we'd drive up to the hill and look around for people. And if there were people there, we just drove right on by. And maybe a couple of times I saw a couple of horsemen up there. It was a cattle ranch. And so we sort of avoided people. And I made no contact until after the program was over. After I'd stopped flying, I contacted NASA and told them what I was doing with the wing.
You were contacted by Richard Miller. Can you tell me how that contact was and what kind of communication you had with Richard Miller?
Well, Richard Miller, who I did not know, contacted Rogallo at NASA. And Rogallo told him about me. So he sent me a letter and asked for a little film clip or photograph of my wing, and I gave it to him. And I did not know at the time that he was in some sort of publication work with the Soaring Society of America. And that is really where it spread to Southern California. There were people hang gliding in California before this, but they were of a more complicated machine. Volmer Jensen is one name I know of. So hang gliding wasn't totally unknown, but using a flexible kite was to come later, and I'm not sure because I was on the complete other end of the country when it really fired up, and I was hang gliding, not my intention because the engine stopped, but I was hang gliding in Florida while everybody was out there in California. So I really had no line on what was going on in California, but obviously it took off there.
Miller exchanged at least one or two letters back and forth with you. Did he ever contact you again after your initial conversation to let you know how his glider was flying?
About his gliding, I have no idea. He wrote some kind of a book that he distributed where he built a similar, well, very vaguely similar wing with a painter's drop cloth, only he used bamboo for the construction. And how it was assembled, I don't know. It appears might have been tied together, but it was definitely a step down from what I was flying. But people did get off some creditable flights with this machine. But it was a much smaller kite. It was a simpler problem because he had hills with wind. And in Sacramento, we're not noted for winds there. So it was he could get viable flights off with this very, very primitive looking machine. I shouldn't say it was completely primitive because where would the 1600s person come up with a 4 mil polyethylene drop cloth? But the bamboo certainly was available. And I wouldn't be surprised if you dig back with the Chinese and somewhere there's something like this that was being done, but possibly never recorded.